In this presentation, we're going to talk about using direct object pronouns in sentences to replace direct object nouns. This lesson goes with Así se dice Level 3, Repaso E. The first thing we have to talk about probably is how to identify a direct object. A very simple way to find the direct object in a sentence, even in English, is to ask yourself the verb, or say the verb to yourself, and then ask the question, what or whom receives the action? The answer to that question is the direct object. So if we look at these example sentences, not all of them have direct objects. Looking at the first, hablo dos lenguas. So you would say the verb to yourself, hablo, and then you would ask yourself the question, speak what? The answer, dos lenguas, is actually the direct object in that sentence. The same with the second half, estudio. Estudio what? Tres lenguas. So there are two direct objects in that particular sentence. If I look at the second pair of sentences, en mi dormitorio hay una mesa, pongo mi libro en la mesa cuando entro en el cuarto. There's really only one verb that is acting upon anything in this sentence, and that would be put my book on the table. So mi libro would be an example of a direct object. In the next example, en la ciudad, los peatones cruzan la calle en el cruce de caminos. Cruzan is the verb, and then you ask yourself, cross what? La calle. That would be your direct object. Right? And in the last example, there is no direct object. Cuando va a salir de la escuela? Nothing receiving any kind of action, so no direct object. So direct objects have to be the receivers of the action. It doesn't matter how long or short the sentence is, you can still find the direct object by saying the verb, escribo. Escribo what? Un correo electrónico. By asking yourself the what question. Escribo un correo electrónico a mi amigo en España. So see how it doesn't matter that we have extra prepositional phrases. And the escribo un correo electrónico a mi amigo en España porque es su cumpleaños hoy. And even if I took, porque es su cumpleaños hoy, and put that at the beginning of my sentence, I could say something like, porque es su cumpleaños hoy, escribo un correo electrónico a mi amigo. You still have to look for the verb and ask yourself, right what? And the answer to that, the receiver of the action, is your direct object. So using direct object pronouns in sentences means that you are picking a pronoun that is going to agree with the original noun that you are replacing. So if I am replacing a direct object that's singular and masculine, I would pick a singular masculine direct object pronoun. If I'm replacing a direct object pronoun that happens to me, then I would use the me direct object pronoun. So you make your match according to what you already know about first person, second person, third person forms. Now remember, when you get to third person, because everything in Spanish is either masculine or feminine, when I'm looking at the third person choices, I realize that I have a masculine or feminine choice, and those could refer to people or to things, and could also include usted. So if the direct object is him, then I pick the lo pronoun. If the direct object is her, then I pick the pronoun that would stand for singular feminine. If the direct object pronoun is you and you are masculine, then I would use lo as the direct object. So I'm always thinking in my mind, what is it that I'm replacing, and pick the pronoun that would agree. So if I'm going to think about that, matching the person, and the number for the noun that you're replacing, number meaning singular or feminine. If I'm looking at examples like this, escribo la tarjeta. Okay, la tarjeta, the direct object, obviously feminine and singular, so I would choose la to replace la tarjeta, and now I've picked a pronoun to replace a noun. In the example, escribo los verbos. Los verbos, direct object, masculine, plural. I would use los, replace los verbos with the pronoun los. And then in a minute, we'll talk about where that would belong in my sentence. If I'm replacing something like unas preguntas, escribo unas preguntas. I would use the feminine plural choice because las preguntas is feminine and plural. So this is the pronoun that I would use to replace the noun. So notice what I'm talking about, replacing, okay? Getting rid of the original noun and replacing it with a pronoun. So if I'm in English going to give an example with the same first sentence, I would say, I write it. You're not sure really what the it stands for. Could be a letter, could be a card, could be a note. You would have to have something in mind, and that's how you knew to choose la. So the agreement is with whatever you had originally as your noun. The placement of the direct object pronoun into the sentence. Basically, there are three situations, three possible things that can happen in your sentence. You could be working with a simple verb. You could be working with a more complicated verb phrase or verb expression. Or possibly in your sentence, you could be working with a command form. Those are the three possibilities. There really isn't anything else. So what would that look like? In this first sample sentence of escribo la pregunta, we said before that I could take la pregunta and turn it into la, so that now my new meaning is I write it, but the rule tells me that I have to place it in front of the conjugated verb. That's why in some of the reading we've been doing, in El Secuestro especially, you may see sentences like this, la escribo, and your direct object pronoun, well, like we did with the indirect with le gusta, the direct object pronoun comes in front of the conjugated verb. So if escribo is my verb form, the la in front tells me I write it. And that's the placement when you're working with a simple verb. Okay? If you're working with a more complicated verb phrase, so rule number 2 talks about what happens if in my sentence I have something like this, voy a escribir, okay? Or the verb phrase, quiero escribir, or tengo que escribir. You can see that there's an infinitive with a conjugated verb in front. Well, when I have that, then I've got a choice, which means that I can either place the pronoun that I've decided to use, maybe in this case with la pregunta it's going to be la, and that will either go in front of the entire verb phrase, so I would end up with la voy a escribir as a new sentence, I'm going to write it, or because I have an infinitive, my second option would be to move the la to the end of the sentence and actually attach it to the infinitive. So you'd end up with voy a escribirla, written as one word, attached. And I know that gives you trouble sometimes when you're reading, because all of a sudden now the word doesn't quite look like what you expected. But what you should start to recognize is the infinitive is still there. It just has a direct object pronoun attached to the end. Okay, and then the third situation that you might possibly be dealing with in a sentence would be some sort of command verb form. Like in this example, escribe la pregunta. So if you wanted to switch to a pronoun, write it. You really have no option but to attach. Okay, so that's why I say commanded to attach to help you remember. So you would write escribe la as one word. When you do add syllables, frequently you also have to add accent marks. And if you think about the rules, this word ends in a vowel. The stress should be on the next to last, but it doesn't turn out as escribela. It's escribe, and you want to still say the word escribe. So you're adding an accent mark so that you can keep that stress on the I. Escribela. Okay, so again, we have 3 possible kinds of verbs that we'll be working with. The second is the more complicated verb phrase structure, and that's why it kind of makes sense that you would have 2 different options, as far as where to put your pronoun. So if we want to shortcut the rules a little bit and make it more usable, I think if you think of it this way, okay, you have a simple verb in your sentence, and now you want to use a direct object pronoun. So the question is where to place it. Here's a little placeholder. Place it in front of the verb. So that's a little asterisk to say, oh, put my pronoun in front. If I'm working with a verb phrase like, tengo que escribir or voy a hablar or something where you have two verbs that are working together and you have a direct object pronoun, you have a choice. You can either place your direct object pronoun in front of the entire verb phrase, not in the middle of it, notice, or you can move that to the end and attach it to the end of the second verb and then add an accent mark if you need to. Okay, and the third situation might be in a sentence where there's a command. So let's say this C stands for command, and we'll even use exclamation points to make it look more, separate from everything else you do. Your rule is attach it. You don't have a choice. So that little asterisk stands for where I would put the direct object pronoun. Okay, so fill in the note-taking sheet, watch this more than once if you need to, and then tomorrow in class we'll work more with direct object pronouns. Hasta la vista.